marble floors of the Domus Aurea were always cold, even in summer. Cassia had learned to walk them without sound, her bare feet making no more noise than a breath of wind through the colonnades. Silence had become her nature, not just in voice but in movement, in presence, in existence itself. For 8 years, she had perfected the art of being invisible. She moved through the emperor's palace like a ghost, carrying water jugs and linens, lighting oil lamps as dusk fell over Rome. The other slaves whispered among themselves, sharing gossip and complaints in hushed tones when the overseers weren't listening. But Cassia never joined them. She couldn't. The moment she'd arrived at the Domus Aurea as a 10-year-old girl, trembling and terrified, she'd made a choice that would define her life. She would never speak again. It hadn't been easy at first. The impulse to cry out when struck, to answer when questioned, to scream when afraid, these were natural as breathing. But Cassia had learned to swallow her voice, to lock it deep inside where no one could reach it. Because she'd discovered something in those first terrifying weeks. A slave who couldn't speak was a slave who couldn't betray secrets. And in the imperial household, secrets were more valuable than gold, more dangerous than poison. The overseer, Domitian, had tested her thoroughly at first. She'd struck Cassia across the face, demanding she speak. She'd withheld food, threatened the lash, even held her hand over a flame. But Cassia had remained silent, tears streaming down her face, her lips pressed together until they bled. Eventually, Domitian had accepted what seemed obvious. The girl was mute. Probably had been since birth, worthless for anything but the simplest tasks. That acceptance had saved Cassia's life. Now, at 18, she understood the palace's rhythms as intimately as her own heartbeat. She knew that Senator Verus met with the Praetorian prefect every third night in the Eastern Gardens. She knew that the emperor's food taster had been replaced twice in the past year, both times after mysterious illnesses. She knew that the empress wept in her chambers when she thought no one was listening, mourning the son she'd lost in childbirth, or so everyone believed. But Cassia knew differently. She'd been there that night 8 years ago carrying fresh linens to the birthing chamber. She'd hidden behind a curtain when the midwife and Senator Verus had entered, their voices low and urgent. She'd heard them speak of the child, alive, healthy, a boy. She'd heard Verus say, "The emperor must never know. If he discovers his son lives, everything we've built will crumble." She'd watched through a gap in the fabric as they'd wrapped the infant in common cloth and handed him to a hooded figure. "Raise him as your own," Verus had commanded. "Keep him safe and silent. One day, when the time is right, we'll reveal him, but not before the emperor is too weak to resist our terms." Then the midwife had screamed, announcing the child had been stillborn. The empress's wails had echoed through the palace. And Cassia, hidden behind her curtain, had understood that she'd just witnessed a conspiracy that could destroy the empire. That was the night she'd stopped speaking, because a mute slave girl was beneath suspicion. A mute slave girl could move through the palace, invisible and ignored, carrying secrets that would get anyone else killed. And Cassia had carried this particular secret for 8 long years, watching and waiting, never knowing what she was waiting for, until tonight. The palace was in chaos. Word had spread that Emperor Septimus was returning from the Germanic campaigns, victorious but wounded. The household slaves had been scrubbing and polishing for days, preparing for his arrival. Cassia moved among them, her arms full of fresh flowers for the great hall, her eyes downcast as always. "They say he took an arrow to the shoulder," one slave whispered to another as Cassia passed. "They say it nearly killed him." "They say he executed 3 of his own generals for cowardice," another replied. "They say he's become a monster." Cassia said nothing. She never did. She arranged the flowers in their bronze vessels, her hands quick and practiced. Around her, the palace hummed with nervous energy. No one knew what mood the emperor would be in when he arrived. Septimus had left Rome 5 years ago, leaving the Senate and his advisors to govern in his absence. In that time, whispers had grown, whispers that he'd abandoned his duties, that he cared more for military glory than for Rome itself, that perhaps the empire would be better served by new leadership. Senator Verus had done nothing to discourage such talk. Cassia finished with the flowers and moved to the great hall, where servants were setting out wine and fruit for the emperor's welcome feast. She took her place against the wall with the other household slaves, waiting. Her heart beat faster than usual, though she kept her face carefully blank. After 5 years, she would finally see the Emperor again. She remembered him from before, a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through walls. He'd never been cruel to the slaves, but he'd never been kind either. He'd simply been above them, untouchable as the gods themselves. She wondered if war had changed him. The sound of trumpets echoed through the palace. The great bronze doors swung open, and the imperial procession entered. First came the Praetorian Guard in their crimson cloaks, weapons gleaming. Then the senators in their white togas, led by Varus with his oiled beard and calculating eyes. Finally, carried on a litter by 6 enormous slaves, came Emperor Septimus himself. Cassia's breath caught. He looked nothing like the man who'd left 5 years ago. His hair had gone completely white, and his face was carved with new lines of pain and fury. His left shoulder was bound in bandages beneath his purple cloak, and his right hand gripped the litter's edge so tightly his knuckles were white. But his eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, still missing nothing. "Kneel," Domitia hissed, and every slave in the hall dropped to the marble floor. Cassia knelt with them, her forehead touching the cold stone. She could hear the Emperor being helped from his litter, hear his sharp intake of breath as weight settled on his wounded shoulder. She could hear his footsteps, slow, deliberate, as he walked among them. 5 years, the Emperor said, his voice rougher than Cassia remembered. 5 years fighting barbarians in forests where the sun never shines. 5 years eating stale bread and sleeping on frozen ground. 5 years wondering if Rome would still be standing when I returned. His footsteps stopped. And here you all are, still fat, still comfortable, still plotting. The last word fell like a blade. Several senators shifted nervously. "Rise," Septimus commanded. The slaves stood, keeping their eyes lowered. Cassia felt the Emperor's gaze sweep across them, assessing, judging. Then his footsteps approached her section of the hall. She kept perfectly still, hardly breathing. "You," the Emperor said. Cassia's heart stopped. Slowly, she raised her eyes. Emperor Septimus stood directly before her, studying her face with an expression she couldn't read. "How long have you served in this household?" Cassia said nothing. She gestured to her throat and shook her head. The pantomime she'd performed countless times to indicate her inability to speak. "She's mute, Divine Emperor," Domitia said quickly, stepping forward. "Has been since childhood. We use her for simple tasks, cleaning, carrying, nothing that requires speech." "Mute," the Emperor repeated, still looking at Cassia. "The gods mock me. Even silence has beauty." He reached out, and for a terrifying moment Cassia thought he would touch her face. Instead, his hand stopped inches away. "What is your name?" Cassia gestured again to her throat, more urgently this time. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "She can write it, Divine Emperor," Domitia suggested. "If you wish." "No." Septimus lowered his hand. "Let silence keep its secrets." He turned away, moving toward his throne. "Bring wine, real wine, not the vinegar these vultures have been hoarding, and send for my physician. This shoulder burns like Hades itself." The hall erupted into motion. Servants rushed to obey, senators clustered around the throne offering welcome, and the Praetorian Guard took up positions around the room. In the chaos, no one noticed Cassia except one person. Senator Varus stood near the throne, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He'd seen the Emperor's attention, noticed his unusual interest. And Cassia knew, with the cold certainty that had kept her alive for 8 years, that she'd just become dangerous. She turned and slipped from the hall as quietly as she'd entered, her mind racing. The Emperor had returned, wounded and suspicious. Varus was watching her, and somewhere in Rome, an 8-year-old boy lived with no knowledge that he was the true heir to the greatest empire the world had ever known. The silence that had protected Cassia for so long suddenly felt fragile as spider silk. One wrong move, one moment of carelessness, and it would shatter, taking her life with it. She returned to the servants' quarters and sat on her narrow cot, her hands trembling. Around her, other slaves chattered excitedly about the Emperor's return, speculating about what changes he might bring. Cassia listened to their voices and felt the weight of her own locked inside her chest, pressing against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. 8 years of silence. 8 years of invisible servitude. 8 years of carrying a secret that could change the course of history. How much longer could she last? As if in answer, a hand fell on her shoulder. Cassia jumped and spun to find Domitius standing over her, the overseer's face grave. "The Emperor has requested you serve at his private dinner tonight," Domitius said. "You're to pour his wine and stand ready to fulfill his needs." She leaned closer, her breath sour. "Do not embarrass this household, girl. The Emperor's favor is a dangerous thing, almost as dangerous as his displeasure. Keep your eyes down and your hands steady." Cassia nodded, her heart sinking. She'd survived 8 years by being invisible, but now the most powerful man in the world had seen her. And there was no telling what he would do with the silent slave, who knew too much. The Emperor's private dining chamber was smaller than Cassia had expected. Simple marble walls, a single couch where Septimus reclined, a low table bearing untouched food. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows across his weathered face. Cassia entered with her head bowed, carrying a bronze pitcher of wine. 2 Praetorian guards stood at the door, expressionless. Inside, only the Emperor waited, his wounded shoulder propped on cushions, his eyes following her every movement. "Pour," he commanded. Cassia approached and filled his cup with steady hands, though her heart hammered. The wine was Falernian, the finest in the imperial cellars, dark as blood, fragrant with age. She set down the pitcher and stepped back, taking her position against the wall. Septimus lifted the cup but didn't drink. Instead, he studied her over its rim. 8 years ago, when I left for Germania, I catalogued every face in this household. Senators, guards, advisors, knowing any might betray me while I was gone. He swirled the wine. "But I don't remember you. You would have been 10 years old." "A child." Cassia kept her expression neutral, eyes fixed on middle distance. "Domitius says you've been here since then, that you're mute, that you're trusted with simple tasks, because you can't repeat what you see or hear." He sipped the wine. "How convenient. A slave who witnesses everything but can speak of nothing." "Tell me, girl, do you think I'm a fool?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Cassia maintained her silence, giving no reaction. Septimus set down his cup with a sharp click. "My enemies think me weakened. They whisper in corners, plotting how to remove me." He leaned forward, eyes burning. "But war teaches you to see patterns, to notice small things. The way a man holds his weapon, the pause before a charge, the silence before an ambush." He stood, wincing as his shoulder protested. Cassia remained motionless as he approached. "You have calluses from carrying water, but your fingers are ink-stained. Someone taught you to write. Your eyes are downcast now, but in the great hall, you were watching everything. Senators, guards, cataloging faces like a scout assessing enemy territory." He stopped before her. "And when I spoke of plotting, I saw recognition in your expression." Just for a moment, Cassia's throat went dry. She gestured to her throat and shook her head, the familiar pantomime. "Show me," Septimus said. She blinked, confused. "Open your mouth. Show me this affliction that has stolen your voice." Slowly, Cassia opened her mouth. Septimus leaned closer, studying her tongue, teeth, throat. His eyes narrowed. Nothing. No scar tissue, no deformity, no sign of injury or disease. He stepped back. "Either you were born without the ability to speak, or you choose silence." Panic fluttered in Cassia's chest. She shook her head more urgently, maintaining the pretense, but she could see doubt in his eyes. "Pour me more wine," he commanded, returning to his couch. Cassia obeyed, her hands trembling slightly. As she filled his cup, she became aware of how vulnerable she was. One word from him and the Praetorian guards would drag her away. She set down the pitcher and began to step back, but her hand caught the cup's rim. It tipped, spilling wine across the marble table. Dark red liquid spread like blood, and without thinking, driven by pure instinct, Cassia gasped, "I'm sorry." The words escaped before she could stop them. Soft, clear, her voice unused for so long that it sounded foreign even to her own ears. The room froze. Cassia's hand flew to her mouth, horror washing over her. The Praetorian guards straightened, hands moving to weapons. And Emperor Septimus, his face transformed. The suspicion vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous. Triumph. "So," he said quietly, leaning back with a smile that held no warmth. "The mute girl speaks." Cassia stood paralyzed, her mind spinning for an explanation, an excuse, anything. But there was nothing. 8 years of perfect silence, shattered in a single moment. Demetia told me you've been mute since childhood. Septimus continued conversationally. Was she lying? Or were you? Cassia's throat worked, but no more words came. Guards, the Emperor said. Bring Demetia, now! 1 Praetorian left immediately. Cassia remained frozen, her mind racing. She could claim the gods had restored her voice. Some would believe it. She could claim she'd been pretending to avoid being sold to a brothel. Also plausible. Or she could tell the truth and hope the Emperor valued honesty. But which truth? Demetia arrived within minutes, her face pale. She took in the scene, the spilled wine, Cassia's stricken expression, the Emperor's calculating gaze, and immediately dropped to her knees. Divine Emperor, I don't understand. This slave just spoke, Septimus interrupted. After 8 years of supposed muteness, in perfect Latin, with an educated accent, he turned to Demetia. Explain. Demetia's mouth opened and closed. Divine Emperor, I swear I believed her mute. She's never spoken in my presence, so she's been deceiving you for 8 years. Deceiving everyone! Septimus rose, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. The question is why? What purpose does a slave girl have in pretending to be mute? Perhaps she feared being sold. Demetia scrambled for explanation. A mute girl has limited value, but a speaking girl risks being purchased for other purposes. It was a good explanation. Cassia saw the Emperor considering it. But then his eyes settled on her again, and she saw something that terrified her more than anger. Curiosity. Is that true, girl? He asked. Did you pretend to be mute out of fear? Cassia's voice came out hoarse. Yes, Divine Emperor. And in 8 years you never once slipped? Never cried out in pain or spoke in your sleep? No, Divine Emperor. Remarkable discipline, the kind that requires extraordinary motivation. He circled her slowly. Fear of being sold might inspire dedication for months, perhaps a year. But 8 years? He stopped before her. What are you so afraid of, child? The question was a trap. Any answer would lead to more questions. I'm afraid of being noticed, Cassia whispered, choosing a truth that revealed nothing. I'm afraid of mattering to people who have power over me. Septimus's expression shifted slightly, recognition there. He understood that fear. Demetia, he said without taking his eyes off Cassia. Leave us! Divine Emperor, leave! Now! The overseer fled, shooting Cassia a look that promised future punishment. The Praetorian guards remained, silent as statues. Septimus returned to his couch and picked up his wine cup. I'm going to tell you something, girl. 5 years ago, when I left Rome to fight in Germania, I believed in the Senate, in law and governance. I believed Rome could be ruled through consensus and tradition. He drained the cup and held it out. Cassia refilled it with shaking hands. War taught me differently. In battle, you learn who can be trusted and who will run. You learn that power respects only strength and weakness is punished without mercy. He sipped the wine. I returned expecting gratitude. Instead, I find vipers, senators who grew fat while soldiers died, advisors who positioned themselves for my death, a palace full of secrets and lies. He looked directly at her. And a slave girl who has perfected being invisible, who watches and listens and says nothing, who in 8 years has probably seen and heard things that would make senators weep. Cassia's pulse thundered. I need eyes and ears I can trust, Septimus said. Not senators whose loyalty can be bought. Not guards whose swords serve whoever pays them. He set down his cup. I need someone who has proven they can keep secrets. Someone who understands the value of silence and the power of knowing when to break it. The implication settled over Cassia like a heavy cloak. He wasn't going to punish her deception. He was going to use it. Tomorrow you will be brought before the Senate, the Emperor continued. They will question how a mute slave suddenly found her voice. You will tell them a priest of Apollo examined you and prayed over your affliction. You will say the god appeared in a dream 3 nights ago, promising restoration, and tonight, when you spilled wine and spoke from genuine distress, the curse was lifted. It was clever. Romans believed in divine intervention, but it elevated her from invisible slave to someone marked by divine favor. Someone worth watching. Why? Cassia whispered. Because I'm giving you a new position. You will serve as my personal scribe. You will attend my meetings, record my words, and listen to everything said in my presence. And when I ask what you've seen or heard, you will tell me the truth. All of it. Cassia's mind reeled. A personal scribe heard state secrets, witnessed the machinery of power. It was a position of incredible trust and incredible danger. I can't, she began. You can and you will. The Emperor's voice hardened. Because the alternative is torture until you reveal why you really pretended to be mute for 8 years. What secrets you've learned, what plots you've witnessed, and then, when you've told me everything, I have you quietly killed. Because a slave who deceived the imperial household cannot be allowed to live. The threat was delivered without emotion, a simple statement of fact. I'll serve, she heard herself say. Good. Septimus relaxed slightly. Tomorrow you'll be examined by priests, questioned by senators, probably threatened by someone who doesn't want me to have loyal eyes. Survive that, and we'll discuss what happens next. He gestured to the door. Go, and Cassia? She froze. It was the first time he'd used her name. Don't make me regret sparing you. I've killed better people for lesser betrayals. Cassia bowed and fled, her legs barely supporting her. She made it back to the servants' quarters before collapsing onto her cot, trembling. 8 years of silence, shattered. Her invisibility destroyed. And now she was elevated to a position that would place her in direct view of everyone who sought to harm the Emperor. Tomorrow, she would face the Senate. She would perform her lie about divine intervention, and she would begin a new role that might finally allow her to speak the truth she'd carried for 8 years, or might get her killed before she could utter a single word. The silence she'd cultivated was broken. Now she would learn whether her voice was a weapon or a curse. Dawn broke over Rome with the color of old blood. Cassia woke to find Domitia standing over her cot, the overseer's face tight with fury. Get up, Domitia hissed. You have an audience with the Senate in 2 hours. The other slaves had already scattered, leaving Cassia alone with the woman whose authority she'd undermined. Domitia grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet, her grip painful. 8 years, Domitia said through clenched teeth. 8 years you made a fool of me. 8 years I defended you, protected you from being sold, because I believed you were a simple mute girl who needed mercy. Her nails dug into Cassia's flesh. If the Emperor hadn't claimed you, I would have you whipped until your back was nothing but ribbons. She released Cassia with a shove and gestured to a basin of water and fresh clothes. Wash, dress, make yourself presentable. The priests of Apollo will examine you first, then the Senate will question you. If you falter, if you contradict yourself. She leaned close. I will personally ensure you regret the day you learned to speak. Domitia swept from the room, leaving Cassia alone. She washed mechanically, scrubbing away 8 years of invisible servitude. The clothes provided were simple but clean, a pale blue stola marking her as household staff. As Cassia dressed, her hands trembled. She'd survived by being nothing, by disappearing. Now she was about to stand before the most powerful men in Rome and convince them the gods had restored her voice. The lie felt heavy as iron shackles. 2 Praetorian guards arrived to escort her. They said nothing, but Cassia felt their contempt like heat from a forge. To them, she was a slave who'd deceived the imperial household. They brought her first to the temple of Apollo, where 3 priests waited. The eldest was a withered man whose eyes held the suspicious gleam of someone who'd spent a lifetime detecting false piety. Strip, he commanded. Cassia's cheeks burned, but she obeyed. The priests examined her thoroughly, checking for marks, scars, any sign of physical deformity. They made her open her mouth while they peered down her throat. They pressed fingers against her neck, feeling for abnormalities. Nothing, the eldest priest finally announced. No physical cause for loss of speech. He fixed Cassia with a penetrating stare. Tell me, child, when did the god first appear to you? Cassia forced herself to speak clearly. 3 nights ago, Holy Father. I dreamed of the temple bathed in golden light. Apollo stood before me, holding his lyre, and he spoke. What did he say? He said that silence was a gift I'd been given to protect myself, but that the time for hiding had passed. He said when I stood before one who carried Rome's burden, my voice would be restored if my heart was pure. It was the story the Emperor had crafted, and Cassia delivered it with as much conviction as she could muster. The priests exchanged glances. And last night, when you spilled wine before the Emperor, your voice simply returned? The eldest asked. Yes, Holy Father. The words came without thought. Convenient, a younger priest muttered. A divine miracle that elevates a slave to imperial service. Apollo's will is not for us to question, the eldest said sharply. Though I agree the timing is fortuitous. He turned back to Cassia. We will declare that you have been touched by divine favor. But know this, girl, If your voice was truly restored by the gods, they can just as easily take it back. And if you prove unworthy of this gift, if you use it for deception, the gods' punishment will be severe. I understand, Holy Father. The priests dismissed her with blessings that felt more like warnings. The Praetorian guards escorted her next to the Senate house. Cassia's legs felt weak as she climbed the marble steps. Inside, the senators waited. Perhaps 50 men in gleaming white togas, their faces ranging from curiosity to open hostility. At the center sat Emperor Septimus on a raised dais, his expression revealing nothing. And standing just below the emperor, his eyes fixed on Cassia like a snake watching a mouse, was Senator Verus. "Bring her forward," Septimus commanded. Cassia walked the length of the chamber, feeling the weight of every gaze. She knelt before the emperor, her heart hammering. "Rise," Septimus said. "These honored senators have questions about your miraculous recovery. You will answer them truthfully." A portly senator spoke first. "You claim to have been mute since childhood, yet the priests find no physical cause. How do you explain this?" "I cannot explain it, honored senator. I only know that I could not speak, and now I can." "How convenient that this miracle occurred in the emperor's presence," another senator said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Some might say it was staged. I gained nothing but fear from speaking, honored senator. I would have preferred to remain invisible." "Then why speak at all?" This from Senator Verus, his voice smooth as oil. "Why not continue your pretense of muteness?" It was a trap. Cassia could feel it closing around her. "I spoke without thinking, honored senator." The wine spilled, and I was horrified. "The apology came from pure instinct." "Instinct," Verus repeated, circling her slowly. "Tell me, girl, in 8 years of silence, how many secrets did you learn? How many conversations did you overhear because people thought you couldn't repeat them?" The Senate chamber grew very quiet. This was the real question. Cassia felt the weight of 8 years of accumulated knowledge pressing against her chest. "I learned that senators worry about grain shipments and tax revenues, honored senator. I learned that guards complain about their pay. I learned that the kitchen staff waters the wine." She kept her voice steady. "I learned nothing of importance because no one speaks of important things in front of slaves, mute or not." It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. But it was the lie they all needed to hear. "Nothing of importance," Verus repeated softly. His eyes held a warning. How fortunate for everyone in this room. An elderly senator stood. "The priests have declared her touched by divine favor. Unless someone wishes to accuse Apollo himself of deception, I see no reason to continue this interrogation. The emperor has claimed her as his personal scribe. Let us accept the god's will." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Most senators seemed relieved to end the questioning. But Verus remained fixated on Cassia. "One final question," he said. "As the emperor's scribe, you will hear state secrets. You will witness private councils. Can we trust a slave who has already proven herself a deceiver? Can we trust someone who hid her voice for 8 years to suddenly be honest now?" It was a fair question. Cassia looked up, meeting Verus's eyes directly. "You cannot trust me, honored senator. Trust must be earned, and I have done nothing to earn it." She turned to address the entire Senate. "I was 10 years old when I decided to stop speaking. I was terrified, alone, and desperate to survive in a world where I had no power. I made myself invisible because invisibility was safety. But the emperor has given me a choice: serve him honestly or face punishment for my deception. I choose service. I choose to use my voice for truth rather than continue hiding in silence." It was a gamble, admitting her fear, her weakness. But something in the senators' faces shifted. They understood survival. "Well spoken," the elderly senator said. "For a girl who spent 8 years silent, you found your voice admirably quickly. Sometimes silence teaches us what words matter most, honored senator." Septimus rose from his seat. "The Senate has heard her testimony. The priests have declared her blessed by Apollo. Unless someone wishes to challenge either my judgment or the god's will, this matter is settled." His gaze swept the chamber. "Cassia is now my personal scribe. She will attend my councils and record my decrees. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or attempts to use her against me will answer to me personally." The senators filed out, most avoiding looking at her. But Verus paused as he passed, leaning close enough that only she could hear. "I know what you heard 8 years ago. I know what you saw. If you value your life, you'll forget it all." Then he was gone, leaving Cassia alone with the emperor and 2 Praetorian guards. Septimus descended from his dais. You did well. Better than I expected. He gestured to a guard. Escort her to the scribe's quarters. Give her writing materials, proper clothes, and a servant of her own. She is no longer a slave, Cassia's breath caught. Divine Emperor? You're a freed woman now. As of this moment, you serve me by choice, not compulsion. His eyes met hers. Though I wonder if you'll find freedom more dangerous than slavery ever was. He was right. As a slave, she'd been beneath notice. As a freed woman in imperial service, she was a target, for senators who feared what she knew, for conspirators who wanted to use her, for anyone who saw her as a threat. But she was also free. And her voice, locked away for 8 years, could finally speak the truth that had been burning inside her, if she could survive long enough to tell it. Freedom, Cassia discovered, was a gilded cage. Her new quarters were in the palace's scribe's wing, a small chamber with plastered walls, a proper bed and a window overlooking the forum. But the door was watched by Praetorian guards. And everywhere she went, eyes followed her. She was given fine clothes, a young slave named Prima to attend her, and the tools of her trade, wax tablets, styluses, ink, and papyrus. 3 days after her Senate audience, a Praetorian arrived at dawn. The Emperor requires your presence. Bring your writing materials. They descended through the palace, down marble steps, through guarded doors, into passages that grew progressively darker. The air turned damp and foul. Where are we going? Cassia asked. The Emperor is inspecting the Colosseum's lower levels. You will record his observations. They emerged into a vast underground complex beneath the arena floor. Torches cast flickering light on corridors lined with iron-barred cells. The smell hit her: blood, sweat, fear, and animal musk. This was where gladiators waited before being sent up to die. Emperor Septimus stood in the main corridor, surrounded by guards and officials. When Cassia approached, he gestured her forward. Good, take notes. He resumed walking. The games are Rome's heartbeat. They keep the mob satisfied and potential rebels reminded of what happens to those who defy the empire. But they're expensive, and good gladiators are increasingly rare. Cassia's stylus moved across her tablet while her mind raced. Why had he brought her here? They passed cells holding gladiators from all nations, then beast pens where lions and tigers paced. Further on, the corridor darkened. The cells here were different, smaller with heavier bars. These were for the condemned, waiting for execution. At the end of the corridor, in the largest cell, a man sat chained to the wall. He was perhaps 30, with a soldier's build, broad shoulders, scarred arms, weathered face. His dark hair was long and unkempt, but his eyes were sharp as they fixed on the Emperor. Lucius Draven, Septimus said quietly. Rome's finest general, victor of a dozen campaigns, conqueror of Britannia's northern tribes, and now a traitor condemned to die in the arena for crimes against the state. The prisoner said nothing. His gaze shifted from the Emperor to Cassia, lingering with unsettling intensity. Tell me, Lucius, Septimus continued. Before I left for Germania, you were my most trusted commander. What turned Rome's greatest general into a traitor? Lucius's lips curved in a bitter smile. I followed your orders, Divine Emperor. The ones you gave me in private before you left. The ones that made me a traitor when you failed to return quickly. Cassia's stylus paused. I gave you no orders that would constitute treason, Septimus said. Didn't you? Lucius leaned forward as far as his chains allowed. You told me to protect the heir, to keep him safe no matter the cost, to ensure that if you died in Germania, Rome would have a legitimate successor. His eyes blazed. I did exactly what you asked. And when you took too long to return, Senator Varus accused me of plotting a coup, of trying to place a false heir on the throne. Cassia's heart hammered. The heir. He was speaking of the heir, the secret she'd carried for 8 years. You speak of fantasies, Septimus said coldly. The Empress's child was stillborn 8 years ago. There is no heir. Is that the lie you've convinced yourself to believe? Lucius's laugh was harsh. Your son lives, Septimus. I know it. You know it. And Senator Varus knows it, which is why he's working to ensure the boy never claims his birthright. Septimus's hand moved to his gladius. For a moment, Cassia thought he would strike. Instead, he turned to the officials and guards. Leave us. All of you. Wait in the main corridor. Divine Emperor, one guard began. I said leave. They retreated reluctantly. Cassia started to follow, but the Emperor's voice stopped her. Not you, Cassia. Stay. You will record this conversation. When they were alone, Septimus approached the cell bars. Speak carefully, Lucius. Your life hangs by a thread. My life ended when Varus accused me of treason, Lucius replied. I have nothing left to lose. But you do. The heir is 8 years old now. Old enough to ask questions. Old enough to be used as a weapon against you if the wrong people find him. Where is he? I don't know. I never knew. That was your design, plausible deniability. The midwife arranged the transfer. The family who took him doesn't know he's imperial blood. Lucius's expression hardened. But Varus suspects. He's been searching, and when he finds the boy, he'll either kill him or use him to control you. Cassia's stylus moved mechanically, recording every word while her mind spun. The Emperor had known all along. He'd orchestrated the deception himself. A living heir is a target, Septimus said quietly. Every ambitious senator would see him as a tool or replacement. A dead heir mourned and buried is safe. He gripped the bars. I did what was necessary to protect him. And instead, you left him vulnerable, Lucius said. Without protection, without knowledge of who he is. When Varus finds him, the boy will have no idea why men with swords are coming. Then I need to find him first. Septimus turned to Cassia. You were recording this. Do you understand what you've heard? Yes, Divine Emperor. And do you understand that if word of this conversation leaves this corridor, we will all be dead before sunset? I understand. Septimus studied her, then turned back to Lucius. If I commute your sentence, will you help me find my son? Hope flickered across Lucius's face. I'm scheduled to die in the games tomorrow. How do you propose to spare me without raising questions? I don't spare you. Not officially. A cold smile crossed the Emperor's lips. You die in the arena tomorrow as scheduled. But I ensure your opponent knows how to make a death look convincing without delivering it. The crowd sees a traitor's blood. But you survive to be smuggled out and begin searching for my son. Fake my death. Lucius's eyes narrowed. Risky. It's the only way. I need someone I can trust, someone with no official ties to me. A dead general is perfect for the task. And her? Lucius gestured toward Cassia. What's her role? She records it. Every word, every detail. If something happens to me before we find my son, she'll have a complete account of the truth, hidden somewhere safe to be revealed only if necessary. Cassia understood. She was being made into a living insurance policy, but it also made her the most dangerous person in Rome. I need an answer, Lucius, Septimus said. Die tomorrow for real, or die as theater and help me find my son. Lucius looked from the Emperor to Cassia. Finally, he nodded. I'll help you. But when we find the boy, you'll acknowledge him. No more hiding. He deserves to know who he is. You have my word. Septimus gestured to Cassia. She's been in this palace for 8 years, invisible and silent. If anyone overheard whispers about the heir, it would be her. Cassia, did you hear anything that might help us? This was it, the moment to speak the truth she'd carried like a stone. The midwife, she said quietly. The night the Empress gave birth, I was there, hidden. I saw the midwife take the child. Before she left, I heard her say a name, Marcus Tullius, a merchant in the Subura district. She said he and his wife had recently lost their own son, that they would welcome the child as replacement. Both men stared at her. Septimus's face had gone white. You knew, he breathed. All this time you knew where my son was taken. I knew a name, Divine Emperor. Nothing more. I was 10 years old and terrified. I didn't understand what I'd witnessed until years later, and by then... She met his gaze. By then I'd learned that silence was the only way to survive. Lucius laughed, a sound edged with disbelief. The one person in Rome who could help us has been standing mute in the palace for 8 years. Not mute anymore, Septimus said. He turned to Lucius. Marcus Tullius in the Subura. After your death tomorrow, that's where you start. Find my son, bring him somewhere safe, and wait for my signal. And if Varus finds him first, then you do whatever is necessary to protect him, even if it means killing a senator. Septimus's voice was ice. I've spent 8 years protecting Rome. Now I'm going to protect my son. And I don't care who burns in the process. He strode from the corridor, leaving Cassia alone with Lucius. The condemned general studied her through the bars. You're either very brave or very foolish, he said. Probably both. I'm trying to survive, Cassia replied. Same as you. Then we have something in common. He smiled grimly. See you after I'm dead, scribe. Assuming we both live that long. Cassia hurried after the Emperor, her tablet clutched against her chest. Behind her, Lucius Draven sat in his cell, already calculating his resurrection. And somewhere in Rome's Subura district, an 8-year-old boy lived in ignorance of the forces gathering around him. The silent slave had spoken at last, and her words were about to change everything. The Colosseum roared with 50,000 voices. Cassia stood in the imperial box beside Emperor Septimus, her writing tablet forgotten as she watched the arena floor below. The morning's executions were complete. Now came what the mob truly wanted: gladiatorial combat. The traitor Lucius Draven. The announcer's voice boomed. Condemned for treason. Today he faces justice. The crowd erupted. Cassia's hands clenched as iron gates opened and Lucius emerged, blinking against sunlight. He wore minimal armor. A leather corselet, one arm guard, only a gladius. No shield, no helmet. This was meant to be an execution. Across the arena, another gate opened. A massive Germanic gladiator stepped out, fully armored, carrying a shield and gleaming sword. Marcus the Goliath, undefeated in 30 fights. Divine Emperor, Cassia whispered urgently. That fighter will kill him. Watch, Septimus said quietly. The fighters circled. Marcus attacked with brutal force, but Lucius moved like water, dodging, testing defenses. His gladius found a gap in Marcus's armor. Blood sprayed. First blood to the traitor, but Marcus wasn't finished. He spun with his shield, catching Lucius across the ribs and sending him sprawling. The Germanic fighter advanced, raising his sword while the crowd chanted, "Death! Death! Death!" Cassia turned away, certain she was about to witness murder. But Septimus remained still as stone. The crowd's roar changed, from bloodlust to surprise. Cassia looked back. Lucius had rolled, and Marcus's blade embedded in sand. Before the larger man could free it, Lucius was on him, gladius at Marcus's throat. But instead of driving it home, Lucius hesitated. Just a heartbeat. Marcus's hand shot out, gripping Lucius's wrist. The two men were frozen, locked together close enough to whisper. Then Marcus released him and fell backward, Lucius's blade appearing to slash across his throat. Blood fountained, impossible amounts, spraying across Lucius, soaking the sand. The Germanic fighter collapsed, clutching the fatal wound. The crowd went silent, stunned. Lucius stood over the body, drenched in blood. He raised his gladius to the imperial box, not in triumph, but in salute. Magnificent, Septimus murmured. Now comes the difficult part. The announcer's voice rang out. The divine emperor will decide his fate. Septimus stood, extended his hand, and slowly turned his thumb downward. The crowd erupted. 4 gladiators surrounded Lucius. The execution would be quick, except it wasn't. The spear thrust appeared to enter Lucius's chest, but the angle was wrong. It passed under his arm. Lucius convulsed, blood spilling from his mouth. A concealed bladder, Cassia realized. He collapsed into the sand, twitching, then lying still. Dead. To 50,000 witnesses, Lucius Draven was dead. It's done, Septimus said quietly. By sunset, he'll be smuggled out in a death cart. By tomorrow, he'll begin his search. He turned to Cassia. And you will continue yours. My search, Divine Emperor? For proof of Varus's conspiracy. Starting now! Before Cassia could respond, a commotion erupted behind the imperial box. Raised voices, clashing armor. Then Senator Varus appeared, flanked by Praetorian guards. Divine Emperor, Varus said, his voice carrying false concern. I apologize for this interruption, but there's been a development. His eyes slid to Cassia. Evidence that certain individuals have been conspiring against you. Evidence involving your new scribe. Cassia's blood turned to ice. Explain, Septimus commanded. Varus gestured to a guard holding a leather satchel. This was found hidden in the scribe's quarters.
It contains coded messages detailing your movements, information that could only come from someone in your inner circle. Impossible, Cassia said sharply.
I've sent no messages. Then how do you explain these? Varus pulled out papyrus sheets covered in writing. Letters addressed to known enemies of Rome. These documents are forgeries, Septimus said, cutting through Varus's performance. Varus blinked. Divine Emperor? Forgeries. Obvious ones, Septimus held up a sheet. This is Egyptian papyrus, expensive rare. A freedwoman scribe would use common Roman papyrus. The ink is iron gall, costly. Palace scribes use carbon ink, and the handwriting isn't hers. He was right. Cassia saw the letters were formed differently than her own script. Someone went to considerable trouble to manufacture these, Septimus continued, his gaze settling on Varus. Someone with expensive materials and authority to plant evidence. Someone who benefits from discrediting my scribe before she can reveal what she knows. Varus's face remained composed. Divine Emperor, I only brought these to your attention as a loyal servant. Of course you did. Just as you were loyal when you accused General Draven of treason. When you've spent 8 years searching for something you believe threatens your power. When you've positioned yourself to control the succession. The temperature dropped. Varus's guards shifted nervously. I don't know what lies this girl has whispered, Varus said carefully. But I have served Rome faithfully for 20 years. Everything you've done has been for your own advancement. Septimus stepped closer. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I know about your secret meetings, your promises to foreign ambassadors, your search for my son. The admission hung in the air like a blade. Varus's composure cracked. Your son is dead, he said flatly. He died 8 years ago. She's fed me nothing but truth. Truth I already knew but needed confirmed. Septimus's voice turned to ice. My son lives. You've known it since the beginning. You were there that night. You helped arrange his disappearance, thinking you could use him as leverage. But when I gave orders to Draven to protect the heir, you realized you'd lost control. So you destroyed Draven and continued searching. Varus's hand moved toward his belt, but Septimus's guards were faster. Blades appeared surrounding the senator. You have a choice, Septimus said quietly. Confess your conspiracy and I'll grant exile. Refuse and you'll face interrogation, then the arena. Except your death won't be theater. Varus smiled coldly. You've already lost, Septimus. Even if you find the boy, the Senate will never accept him. Without proof of his birth, proof you destroyed, he's nothing. Then I'll provide proof. She was there that night. She witnessed everything. The midwife is dead. Killed in a fire 2 years ago. As for this girl's testimony, Varus laughed. The word of a slave who pretended to be mute for 8 years. No one will believe her. He turned to his guards. We're leaving. The Divine Emperor is clearly unwell. The Senate will need to discuss regency options. Septimus's hand shot out, gripping Varus's throat. The senator gasped, clawing, but Septimus's grip was iron. You want proof? You want witnesses? Then let's give Rome a spectacle. He released Varus, who stumbled backward. Tomorrow at dawn, you will face trial before the full Senate. Every conspiracy will be exposed, and when you're found guilty, you will die in the arena. The same games you've used to eliminate your enemies. You can't, I can. I'm the Emperor. Septimus gestured to his guards. Take him. And Senator, when they chain you beneath the Colosseum, remember that you destroyed yourself by underestimating a silent slave. They dragged Varus away. When he was gone, Septimus turned to Cassia. Tomorrow's trial will be dangerous. Varus has allies who will try to discredit you. You'll need to be strong. I'll be ready. Divine Emperor. Good, because everything, my son's life, Rome's future, depends on you finding your voice when it matters most. Below, the games continued. But Cassia barely heard the roar. Tomorrow, she would stand before Rome's Senate and speak the truth she'd carried for 8 years. Tomorrow, the silent slave would become the Empire's most important witness if she survived the night. Cassia didn't sleep that night. She sat in her chamber, staring at the wax tablet where she'd recorded every detail of the conspiracy. Words that could reshape Rome's future or get everyone involved executed for treason. Just before dawn, her door opened. A Praetorian guard appeared. The Senate convenes at sunrise. You're to come now. Cassia dressed quickly, tucking the tablet into her belt. Prima, her servant, helped arrange her hair with trembling hands. Be careful, mistress, Prima whispered. They say Senator Varus has threatened everyone involved in this trial. Then I'll make sure it's the right blood that flows, Cassia replied, surprised by the steel in her voice. The Senate House was already filled when she arrived. Every senator in Rome seemed present, their white togas creating a sea of expectant faces. At the center, chained between guards, stood Senator Varus. His face was bruised, but his eyes burned with defiant rage. Emperor Septimus sat on his throne, his bearing regal despite his wounded shoulder. When Cassia entered, every head turned. The witness arrives, Septimus announced. Cassia, freedwoman and imperial scribe, who will testify to conspiracy and treason. An elderly senator rose, Marcus Aurelius Cato, one of Rome's most respected men. Divine Emperor, many here question this witness's validity. She has admitted to deceiving this household for 8 years. How can we trust her now? Because she has no reason to lie, Septimus replied. She gains nothing except danger. If Varys is found innocent, she'll be executed for false accusation. If he's found guilty, his allies will seek revenge. She risks everything by speaking. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Cassia stepped forward, her legs steadier than expected. Speak, girl, Cato said. Tell us what you claim to have witnessed. Cassia took a breath. I was 10 years old, serving in the Empress's household. On the night she gave birth, I was sent to fetch linens. When I arrived at the birthing chamber, I heard voices and hid behind a curtain. She met Varys's gaze directly. I saw Senator Varys enter with the midwife. I heard them discuss the child, that he was alive and healthy. I heard Varys say the Emperor must never know, that they would raise the boy in secret until the time was right. Lies, Varys shouted. This girl fabricates stories to please her master. I saw them wrap the living infant in common cloth, Cassia continued. I heard the midwife give a name, Marcus Tullius, a merchant in the Subura district who'd recently lost his own son. The child was taken there that night. The Senate erupted. Cato raised his hand for silence. These are serious accusations. Do you have proof beyond your word? The midwife is dead, Varys interjected quickly. Conveniently, she cannot confirm these fantasies. But others can, a new voice said. Everyone turned. Through the Senate doors walked a man in common clothes, his face scarred but his bearing unmistakably military. It took Cassia a moment to recognize him. Lucius Draven, supposedly dead. The chamber exploded into chaos. Senators shouted. Guards drew weapons, and Varys's face went white. I am Lucius Draven, the general said, his voice cutting through the noise. Condemned traitor, executed yesterday in the arena. Except I didn't die. The Emperor arranged my survival because he needed someone to search for his son. Someone Varys couldn't touch. This is madness. Varys struggled against his chains. That man died. 50,000 people saw it! 50,000 people saw what they expected to see, Septimus said calmly. They saw a spectacle and believed what they were told. He gestured to Lucius. Tell them what you found. Lucius stepped forward. Last night I went to the Subura district. I found Marcus Tullius, the merchant. His household includes a boy of 8 years, adopted after his birth son died. The merchant knows nothing of the child's true origins. He paused. The boy has the imperial birthmark. A small mark on his left shoulder blade, shaped like an eagle, the same mark every member of the Flavian dynasty has carried for 3 generations. The Senate fell silent. Every senator knew about the imperial birthmark. It was documented, verified, impossible to fake. I've already sent soldiers to bring the boy here, Septimus said. He'll arrive within the hour. When he does, physicians will examine the birthmark and confirm his identity. Varys's composure finally shattered. You fool. You think the Senate will accept a boy raised in the streets? You think Rome will bow to a child who knows nothing of governance or military command? I think Rome will accept my legitimate son, Septimus replied coldly. And I think you've spent 8 years trying to control that legitimacy. When I gave Draven orders to protect the heir, you realized your plot was failing. So you destroyed Draven and intensified your search. All I did was for Rome's stability. Varys shouted. You abandoned the empire for 5 years to play soldier in German forests. Someone had to plan for succession. By hiding my son? By plotting to control him like a chess piece? Septimus rose from his throne. You didn't serve Rome. You served your own ambition. Senator Cato stood again. Divine Emperor, what you've revealed is extraordinary. But this woman's testimony alone isn't sufficient. Then examine this, Cassia said, pulling out her wax tablet. I recorded everything. Every conversation I overheard as a mute slave. Every meeting between Varys and his co-conspirators. Every payment to physicians and guards and officials. 8 years of evidence documented in detail. She handed the tablet to Cato. The old senator's eyes widened as he read, his face growing paler. This, if this is accurate, half the Senate is implicated. Not half, Cassia said, but enough. Varys built a network over 8 years. Some knew the full conspiracy. Others only knew pieces. But together, they've been preparing to seize control the moment the Emperor died. All lies, Varys roared. Written by a slave with delusions. She's making herself the center of a grand conspiracy for attention.
If I wanted attention, Cassia said quietly, I would have spoken years ago.
I would have sold these secrets to the highest bidder. Instead, I stayed silent because silence kept me alive. I'm speaking now because the emperor's son deserves to know his true father, because Rome deserves a legitimate succession, and because I'm tired of watching ambitious men destroy lives for power they never earned. The words rang through the chamber. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Cato nodded slowly. I've known you for 20 years, Varus. I called you friend. But this evidence, if even half is true, you've betrayed everything Rome stands for. He turned to Septimus. Divine Emperor, I recommend a full investigation. Question every conspirator. And when we've determined the full extent of this treason, let justice be absolute. Agreed, Septimus said. But Varus's fate is already decided. He will face the arena tomorrow. A senator who plotted against his emperor, fighting for his life against Rome's finest gladiators. If the gods favor him, he may survive. If not, then the gods have rendered their judgment. You can't do this. Varus struggled desperately. I'm a senator. I have rights. You forfeited them when you conspired against the throne. Septimus gestured. Take him to the cells. Guards dragged Varus away, his protests echoing. When he was gone, Septimus approached Cassia. You've given Rome a gift. Truth preserved through 8 years of silence. Courage, when speaking meant risking everything. He raised his voice. From this day forward, Cassia is under imperial protection. Any who harm her answer to me personally. He turned to the assembled senators. And when my son arrives, when you see the birthmark and confirm his identity, Rome will have its heir. A boy who knows what it means to live without power, to survive on strength rather than birthright. Perhaps that's exactly the kind of emperor Rome needs. Cassia felt tears stinging her eyes. Not from fear, but from release. 8 years of silence, finally broken. 8 years of secrets, finally revealed. She had found her voice when it mattered most, and in doing so, she had changed the fate of an empire. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke over Rome. A new day, a new beginning. And somewhere in the Subura district, a boy was learning that he was born to rule the greatest civilization the world had ever known. The silent slave had spoken, and Rome would never be the same.